another episode of Surround Yourself with Greatness. And today I am surrounded by my dear friend, a person who's doing amazing things. And he's really, really helping people find their flow. And it's all about having your flow over your fear. So there's a podcast. I've been a guest on the podcast. So you should definitely check it out. If you're watching this on YouTube, the link to the podcast is going to be in the description. But Adam Hill, he is a keynote speaker. He's a best-selling author. He's a nine-figure CEO. You heard that right, nine-figure CEO. But more importantly, he's a world championship qualifying triathlete. So we're going to be talking about all of his amazing things. But what I love about Adam is his life journey. He's been able to overcome so many different things, and he gets to share that and apply it in his life on a daily basis. But more importantly, he's using his podcast to really help people go to the next level. So Adam, welcome to Surround Yourself with Greatness.
Thank you, Kuda. That was so awesome to be here. I'm so honored, and I appreciate you letting me on.
So we met in a program where we were kind of like upskilling our speaking skills, right? We were both part of the same cohort with heroic public speaking. So tell me a little bit about what made you decide to be a public speaker.
Yeah, well, and talk about imposter syndrome, sitting in a room with people like yourself, entrepreneurs, astronauts, and just amazing people that are doing these things. It's like, what am I doing here? Wow. But no, yeah. And so what kind of got me on the role of wanting to be a public speaker is I've always loved, I mean, from the performance side, I've always loved performing. I grew up playing music and just love creative and love living into a creative energy and just creating things.
Mhm.
And speaking was one of those things, and I love talking, which is why I have a podcast. But ultimately, the message that I wanted to share, is related to my life of living in fear. Many of the decisions that I made early in life were all based out of fear. I mean,
Mhm.
whether it was a decision to play a sport or not, or even just like a play in the game and playing baseball, stepping in or out of the batter's box, all based on fear or talking to people or all that. And that led me down a pretty dark path of alcoholism and just unhealthy habits and not really having a great life. My world just got small because I never leaned into my comfort zone. And so when I came out of that, when I recovered, and we can get into that story too. When I recovered and I realized that there's so much life beyond that fear.
Mhm.
I realize that there's a message there for everybody, that instead of fighting fear and really battling it like we seem to every day, we can instead embrace it or rise above it and realize our true potential. And that's the message I really want to share. That's what I wanted to share on stage, and that's what I'm trying to do now.
Wow, that's amazing. So one of the things that you and I got to talk about when we were meeting at HPS was your journey with alcoholism. And
Mhm.
at first, when you're telling me about it, I couldn't believe it because, like, as I was looking at you, like, what? You used to struggle with this? So, can you maybe share a little bit if there was a pivotal moment that led you to a life of alcoholism and anxiety? And then what then led to the shift, right, to you now becoming an elite triathlete and a successful CEO?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. The shift into alcoholism wasn't one of those things where it was like I went from sober to just alcoholic like right away. There was a long progression of it, and that's kind of the insidious nature of any form of addiction. Really, a lot of times it's not an immediate thing, or there's no indication that it'll happen. I grew up in a very loving household, had a father and mother that loved each other very much, and they were there for me. I had a very comfortable young life, but that was also a lot of the problem, is that I leaned into comfort, and that fear again just kind of dominated my life, even though it was subtle. We never really talked about, in the growing up in the 80s and early 90s, we didn't really talk about the idea of mental health or anxiety or those kinds of things. We were more on the tune of like stay off drugs and all of that, which of course was a good message, but we avoided the real topic of mental health for kids in that day and age. And because of that, I really didn't know that I had an anxiety disorder. I just thought I was a worrywart. I thought I worried about everything.
Mhm.
And so getting into college, as college kids do, I discovered alcohol. At my first party, I took a drink of my first beer out of a keg at a keg party. It was Mickey's Lager, and it was like it tasted terrible. That first drink of beer always tastes disgusting, right? But the way that it hit me was just like, oh my gosh, this feels good. It's warm. It's like I'm feeling lightheaded. And all of a sudden, I'm social. I'm talking to people. And if I didn't know that I had an anxiety disorder before that, I realized it then because I'm like, wow, this is what life is supposed to be like.
Right.
And so that first experience with alcohol, I think I had like two beers. Both were mostly foam because it was a keg. And I went home, went to sleep, woke up without a hangover, and there were zero consequences. So there's really no indication that I would become a problem drinker. But over time, over the course of, a couple of years, little problems started to pop in. I would like, man, I don't remember what happened last night. Was everything okay? Or like, I'd hear from friends like, wow, man, you went a little bit overboard last night. Maybe not so much next time. And things just got worse and worse and worse until I lost control and the panic attacks started coming in and the panic attacks started getting worse. So that was kind of the nature of the progression of my alcoholism was as the drinking got worse, so too did the anxiety when I was sober. And
Mm.
they turned into massive panic attacks, irrational fear where I would collapse onto the floor in absolute terror and dread because of something that was irrational. It may have been like I was afraid that I had a deadly disease or something like that. And there was no reason
Uh,
for me to believe that. But yeah. And but I and so I kept turning to drinking more and more to suppress that and push it aside. And that all came to a head in 2012. So after about 15 years of living that way, I there was one particular rule. I set a number of rules for myself just to show that I can maintain control over my life and keep drinking. And one of the rules that I had that I would never break was don't drink and drive. And I didn't break that rule for well over, a decade of drinking. And it was just like my non-negotiable. That was the sacred thing that I would not break. But then even ultimately that one I did break. And I got into a DUI accident when I was completely blacked out, meaning I don't even remember getting behind the wheel. I don't remember getting in the accident. But I do remember coming to in the back of the police car and just feeling this immense amount of shame and disbelief in what I had become, that I wasn't just a danger to myself, but I was a danger to others now. Unfortunately, nobody was hurt, by grace or whatever you want to call it. But that was the wake up call for me that I had zero control over my life.
wow.
And I needed help to get better. And that's when I walked into recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous.
Wow. And how long was that journey of recovery once you entered into rehab?
Interesting. It's still going on. I mean, I can never, if I ever pick up a drink again, I'm right back into my old habit. So fortunately, I'm 12 years sober today. It's, 12 years ago, I put down, or that was the last drink I had, and it happened to be the one before I got behind the wheel. But haven't had a drink since. And yeah, that recovery, I would say that it's an ongoing process, kind of like anything. It's just an ongoing journey. And I'm a sober person today, and I'm very grateful for that. And fortunately, I don't have the desire to drink anymore. Like that desire just doesn't come up. I can be in social situations where people are drinking, but it wasn't always like that. So getting into sobriety, it was very difficult, and I didn't know how I'd manage myself. But that idea of a community of support through other alcoholics who were in recovery, through Alcoholics Anonymous, and taking the 12 steps, that was almost the first time in my life that I'd ever really leaned into a community of support that could help me and learn the value of frameworks in terms of helping us to heal or helping us to grow. And both of those things, just going through the 12 steps, going through them with a community, that really helped me to get sober and stay sober. And I would say the whole process of going through those 12 steps was, probably about a year-long process from, 1 to 12. But but ultimately that recovery process is just an ongoing journey.
Wow. So, what are some of the biggest challenges you faced in your transformation, and how did you overcome it? Because obviously now you talk about it
Mhm.
as if like, okay, I went into this program and now I'm sober for 12 years, but I'm pretty sure, you know, every single day you would face a different set of challenges and obstacles that you had to conquer and overcome every single day. So, what was some of the biggest ones that you really had to overcome?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, and this was really an in retrospect, looking back on it, it really kind of sheds light on the perspective of fear that we all have, and that perspective
Mm-hmm.
of anxiety or fear. Because at the time, going into recovery at that point in time, I had a lot of stuff to fear. I mean, I had legal issues. I just gotten a DUI accident. I could go to jail for years. I could have killed somebody, which would have put me in jail for life.
Right.
And so I had a lot of things to be afraid of. And 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 ultimately, really, an interesting thing happened. So that was one of the bigger challenges, was just realizing that I had to face those things. But the fact that I was in a community at that point, and the fact that I was moving toward healing, and
Mm-hmm.
really it allowed me to let all of that stuff go and be okay either way. If I was going to go to jail, I was going to be okay. If I was going to, not go to jail, it was going to be okay. And just letting go and being able to get the tools to let go of that stuff really helped me to heal through it. But that's where that perspective of fear comes in, because at that point in time it was like, for somebody who has these anxieties, or when we have these intense fears that may be irrational, they feel very real. They feel like the end of the world is going to come when we face this thing. But when the thing actually stares us in the face, when it happens, really we find out that one step at a time we can get through it, and it's not going to be the end of the world. We just take a step at a time, we let go, and we can make forward progress.
With the whole notion of taking things day by day,
Mhm.
can you describe some of the daily habits or disciplines that have played a crucial role in your journey to success? Like, are there
Yeah.
certain things that you've now had to incorporate into your lifestyle that has enabled you to get to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. My morning practice has been probably my most important thing that I've done, in the last decade or so, since getting sober. I mean, we're working with in sobriety, working through the 12 steps, kind of set that foundation of healing. But then it was all about, like, how do I maintain, how do I personally grow? And so now I've really established a morning practice that helps me to kind of get that daily courage or daily momentum, and get that. So what that includes is I wake up, I do a series of breathing exercises to kind of get my energy up, and
Is it
kind
the
of
Wim Hoffman method?
it is, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So I
nice.
love the Wim Hof method. I've been doing it for about 6 or 7 years now, every single day. That's like the first thing I do, and it's totally energizing, totally wakes me up, and kind of puts me into a healthy state of mind. Then I do some, scripture reading. For me, I read the Bible, and some passages, and things like that, to start. Go through some prayer, do some meditation, do some empowering reading, and a cold shower is one of the important things. So I've moved to Colorado a couple of years ago, and one of the great things about Colorado is the showers are always ice cold. So getting in that ice cold shower is one of the first things that I do to really tell myself that, this is going to be the day, that I'm going to overcome my mind. And every single day without fail, my brain tells me I'm not going to want to get in there. I don't want to get in there, but I do that thing, and learned from Tony Robbins, in fact, that you overrule your brain and you just go and do it anyway. And so that's that first act. And that's been a game changer for me too. So those are some of the habits that I do in the morning to keep me going.
That's amazing. I, like you, do the Wim Hof method. I try to do it every day, if I'm to be honest. I sometimes I forget to do it, but the cold shower, I do that every day. It's the non-negotiable for me.
Mhm.
So I shower twice a day, and both of the showers, they start off hot, but then I end it with where you're switching between cold and hot,
Yeah.
to kind of like just freeze myself. And then there's sometimes where I just do it fully blown cold. And I like to do it during the winters. I live in New York. So right now, if it's in the morning and I just take a fully cold morning shower, it wakes you up. I don't drink coffee, so for me, that's kind of like my caffeine and my wake up boost. So I love that. So
Yeah.
one of the other things too that I've incorporated is I actually believe that you win tomorrow today, right?
Hmm. Ooh, I like that.
So my evening routine, I believe, is actually more important than my morning routine, because in the evening I get to reflect, I get to journal in this beautiful notebook that someone sent to me. Thank you, Adam, for it. And I really just kind of like set my intentions for tomorrow. So by the time I wake up in the morning, I've already kind of like laid out some of the things that I want to do. I've reflected on yesterday and some of the things that I did well, some of the things that didn't go well. So for me, I kind of like try to make sure that I have a very strong evening routine, because
Mhm.
your morning routine, believe it or not, I think can only be as strong as your evening routine. And let me explain to you why. So let's say, since we're talking about drinking, right? So let's say in the evening, you go drinking. You won't, but for someone who's listening who drinks, they do that.
Right.
And then when they wake up in the morning, even if they have all, the Rolls Royce of morning routines, but because you're hungover, you're not sharp, you're tired, you could implement your morning routine. It can kind of like help you a little bit to get started, but it's never really going to be optimal. But if you go to bed on time, you don't drink, you don't overeat and all that stuff, and you kind of like clear your mind and set your mind up for that kind of like unwinding period for you to sleep, you're going to actually find that your morning routine is actually be way more powerful, because it's coming off the back of a very good evening routine. And a lot
Hmm.
of the top athletes do that. So Tom Brady, as an example, in his book, he actually talks about the importance of his evening routine being way more important than his morning routine. In the evening, he doesn't have dessert because he doesn't want the sugars and all that stuff. Devices off at 6 p.m. So after 6 p.m., no cell phone, no TV, all that stuff. He doesn't sleep with the phone inside his bedroom. He chills his bedroom so that it's cold, because apparently you sleep better when it's cold than like when it's hot, which I get.
Hmm.
I sweat a lot when it's hot. So I actually like it nice and cool. And all these small things. So anyway, just wanted to add a little bit of flavor to what you just shared, so that some of the listeners can gain value there. So you went from struggling with alcohol to now being a triathlete. For me, it doesn't really add up, but somehow you did it. So, can you walk me through, number one, what made you decide to pursue this career, so to say, of being a triathlete, and eventually compete in an Ironman World Championship event?
Yeah. 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 And so the seed was planted pretty early on for me. I mean, like I'd mentioned, I lived most of my life based on fear and limiting beliefs if like I could never do something like that. And one of those instances happened uh probably back in like 2006. I remember it was the 2006 Ironman that I was watching on television one Saturday afternoon. And this was in the midst of when I was still drinking, when I was still doing all that. So I hadn't gotten sober yet. But it was 2006. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was watching the Ironman World Championship on television. I didn't know what I was watching, but I saw all these athletes that were just like doing this incredible event where they were swimming 2.4 miles, biking 112 miles, and running a full marathon in just one day. And I watched all the pros, winning and doing all the race. But the thing that inspired me most was at the end of the show, they showed these athletes that were crossing the finish line 17 hours after the race started. And many of them late into the evening, near midnight, and a lot of them with like significant challenges. Like they'd overcome, like what one athlete named John Blaze had ALS. Like he had Lou Gehrig syndrome, where he was still running the race, and a year later he would be in a wheelchair. I saw one athlete that was pushing his son who had cerebral palsy throughout the entire
I've
race.
seen I've seen people like that
Yeah.
in like on the Ironman events.
Yeah, yeah. So Rick and Dick Hoyt, they were kind of the two people that would do that. And so I was seeing all these inspirational people, and it like hit me at that moment, like how inspired I was. I was just like, I would love to do something like that. How amazing would that be?
Right.
And the moment that that thought entered my mind, my brain shut it down and said, "But you can't do that. You're Look at you. You're not an athlete. You've never even rode a bike before. You can't swim a length of a pool. You're an alcoholic. You smoke a pack of cigarettes a day. Go back to drinking beer and feeling sorry for yourself."
Right.
And so that was my first like experience with that, but the seed was planted. And I didn't think about it again until I had a year of sobriety. And over the course of that first year of sobriety, I heard constantly from people who had many years of sobriety, many years of recovery, that would also always give me this advice: don't make any major life changes your first year in recovery. And because I was so committed to wanting to be sober, I listened to that advice and I didn't make any major life changes. Like, no moves, no career changes, no new anything. It was just like sobriety was it. But when I hit a year of sobriety, that's when I decided I was gonna like, yeah, I'm gonna make a major life
I'm gonna
change.
shake things up a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So as I
Shake it
was,
up.
yep. Yeah, so as I was laying in bed and I was recovering from a shoulder surgery at the time because of something stupid that I had done. I don't even know what, but I was recovering from a shoulder surgery and I had a year of sobriety and I was thinking through like, what do I want to do with my life from here on out? I've already had this like spiritual transformation. I'm feeling great. I'm sober a year, something I never thought that I could do. So now I had a point of reference for success that I could have. Um, but my physical health was still terrible. I was still smoking. I was literally eating a bag of peanut M&Ms on my belly while I was thinking of this. And that's when it entered my mind that I should do an Ironman triathlon. And I wanted to go and I wanted to do that race that I saw on television many years prior. And I thought of all of that and I was just like so inspired. And at that moment again, that excitement rose up and I was like, how cool would it be? But at the same moment, that fear popped up again, and that limiting belief that told me you could never do something like that. And it came in there again. But with my empowered mindset, I was able to kind of shift that and say, well, why not? Why couldn't I? Why couldn't I pursue it? I have this, I just got sober. I never thought that I could do that. And so I made a decision at that point that I was going to pursue, that I wanted to qualify for the Ironman World Championship, not just race an Ironman. I wanted to qualify for the one that I saw on television. And it's a race that, that particular race, you have to become one of the top 1% of triathletes in the world to be able to achieve that. And I had no business thinking that I could do that, but it was so certain and so just goal oriented in my mind that I had to do it. And I went and I signed up for my first Ironman, which was going to take place about a year later. I had no experience, and so I figured I'd just build a parachute on the way down and figure it out as I went. And that started the journey of wanting to do it. And yeah, over the course of the next year, I basically kind of uh, gradually moved my way into it, gradually pushed my comfort zone outward in order to achieve that. Because the idea for me of like, trying to swim 2.4 miles or bike 112 miles, that was absolutely terrifying to me because I'd never ridden a road bike before. I'd never swam past the breakers in the ocean. I played in like pools and stuff, but I never swam. And so the idea of like swimming 2.4 miles with athletes punching and kicking past the breakers in the rough water, that was terrifying. But I gradually learned. I started by just learning to float on my back in the pool. And if you've never seen a grown man trying to learn to float in a community pool, it's pretty ridiculous. But I
But you
learned
did
and
it.
yeah, yeah. And just 5% past my comfort zone at a time. I just graduated everything until, a year later I was staring down the starting line of my first Ironman and I became one of them on that day. And yeah, that's kind of how I started my journey.
Wow. Pretty inspiring story. So, for someone who's listening and maybe they are struggling with some fear and anxiety, and they have some big goals that they want to achieve, like maybe running an Ironman one day or starting that business that they've always wanted to start,
Mhm.
what piece of advice would you give them right now?
Yeah, I think we all get trapped in the. I think the first piece is just be really aware of what's preventing you from being there. a lot of us get trapped in this idea of I want to be this thing that of where I'm not, that there's a gap between where I am and where I want to be.
Mhm.
And where I want to be is just so out of the realm of my imagination because I've never been there that we immediately dismiss it because of a few different things. Uncertainty, like we're uncertain we can get there, or overwhelm. We're just overwhelmed by the idea of achieving that,
Right.
or we doubt ourselves. We have self doubt. We just feel like we're not enough or we don't have that. So
Mhm.
identifying those, I think that there's a few things that we can do to really start driving ourselves forward. I think the antidote to uncertainty is conviction, meaning you have that unwavering faith that you can do it in some way. When I was laying in bed recovering from a shoulder surgery, I had no evidence that I could complete an Ironman triathlon, but I
Right.
had conviction because I had this faith that I could do it. And it was this unwavering belief that eventually I could get there if I worked towards it. So that conviction, if you could find that conviction, that's the cure to that uncertainty. And then there's overwhelm. Like if you could find the discipline to take the steps forward, to continue to make progress, that's the antidote to overwhelm. And discipline, I think when we think about discipline, we often tend to inherently know that discipline requires consistency. But the one thing that we forget about, or the one thing that we miss, I think the one thing we neglect about discipline, and this is what I learned by pursuing Ironman, is that in order to be disciplined, at first, we have to slow down so that we could find a sustainable effort. So slowing down and finding a sustainable effort, like a martial artist learning how to do a kick, they do it very slowly at first. And that's why over time they can become faster. Over time, if you give 80% consistently instead of 110%, over time your 80% becomes somebody else's 110%. So you just keep giving 80% consistently, you're going to expand your capacity to perform. That's how you kind of manage that overwhelm over time. And then the self-doubt, that piece is always a hard one too. But I think self-doubt is that idea that we're looking at the top of the mountain of where we want to go, and we're looking at the gap between where we're at and where we want to be. And it seems insurmountable. So we just have to work backward and meet ourselves where we're at in order to
Right.
overcome that
Right. Right.
self-doubt. That next 5% goal, what is the next step? That's next smart goal that we could set, that we could see in our sights, that we can achieve, that is on the path. And if you could stack those small incremental goals, you'll eventually, the next indicated step will be the top of your mountain.
So
And I
it's
think that,
interesting. So yesterday I was flying back from Atlanta, and on the plane I was watching this documentary of people who summited Mount Everest.
mhm.
I thought doing that would take days. It takes weeks.
Totally.
It was like 6 weeks or something like that,
Yeah.
because you need a couple of weeks for your body to acclimatize with, the environment, like the air is thinner or whatever, right?
Right.
So you kind of like climb to base camp, spend a couple of weeks at base camp, and then climb to another level, spend like maybe another week there, and then climb to another level, spend another week, and then actually go to the summit.
Hmm.
And when you're kind of like looking at it from the beginning, it's like, okay, I'm gonna go like however like it is, like 5 miles up or however ridiculous it is up in the air. It starts with one step, right? You
Right.
take that first step forward to say like, hey, over the next 6 weeks or however long it's gonna take you to do it, I'm gonna beat this bad boy.
Hmm.
And a lot of people have done it now. There was a time when nobody had ever done it, but because of the conviction you're talking about, setting your goal, but also understanding it's a process, it's going to take time. But if you stick to it, if you take one step at a time, you're going to get there. Guess what? You will eventually get there. Or if
Yeah.
you miss it, you're going to be way much higher than where you were before. So there's still
Absolutely.
value in you still following through the process. So anyway, we've talked a lot about, some of the challenges you faced with anxiety and alcoholism. We've also talked about your athletic career. Now let's talk about your podcast. So
Sure.
through your podcast, Flow Over Fear, what is the key message you're trying to impact the audience with?
Yeah, so I love to interview people like yourself, or I've interviewed, I have about 140 episodes by now.
Wow.
But And so it's been in ultimately when I started, I was like, I'm not sure if I want to do this. I'll never find and those limiting beliefs again, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I was thinking I'll never find guests or anything like that. But yeah, one step at a time. I learned that I loved it and it was a new passion for me because I recognized that like hearing stories like yours, Kuda, I interviewed our mutual friend, Stephen Pivnik the other day, or
right.
who's coming out,
Builds
or
builds to finish.
yes, yeah. And other people with just these amazing stories of how they went from where they were to where they are and this incredible story. And I realized that there's a lot of podcasts, that do share on the idea of like, well, look how amazing these achievements are and all of that. But I wanted to dig into the specific incidences of fear and that human side because we all face that idea of like how do I get from where I'm at to where I'm going or this specific challenge how it affects me and and so I wanted to dig into that with people and learn those stories and dissect them so that I could understand more and help the audience understand how we can get over those fears, how we can rise above them and stay disciplined
Mhm.
and start to master things at an accelerated rate. As I believe we're so much more capable than what we are, and we don't have to give everything we've got to achieve it. We don't have to sacrifice our souls or our bodies or our families to achieve what we want to achieve. We can do it. We can enjoy the journey, and we can accelerate it. And we can find fulfillment in it. And the guests that I have done that. That's what I love to share with people. So.
And what I love about your podcast is, for me, I think it makes it real because listening to someone who's done that, who can act and serve as a role model to me is super important because sometimes I have these things that I want to achieve, but then I'll be like, well, I don't really know anybody who's done it. And then I tune in and like, oh yeah, I'm built to last. I've done this A, B, and C. I'm like, okay, well, if
Yeah.
this guy can do it, and you hear the stories and you really understand that these are just real people, like who just made the decision to figure it out. There's nothing maybe like super different than me. That's been the key benefit. And if people want to listen to your podcast, how would they do that?
Yeah, so I have it. I'm on YouTube, and I'm doing a kind of a big push on YouTube because we have higher quality video on there. It's where I post a lot of my dad jokes on the shorts and stuff like that. So you can find it on YouTube at Adam C. Hill. That's my tagline. And yeah, Flow Over Fear is on there. It's also on Apple Podcasts and anywhere you can download the audio versions as well.
So again, if you're watching this on YouTube, the link is going to be in the description, so you can just click the link and then boom, you're there. Now,
Boom.
when I listened to your story, right, you went from struggling with anxiety to drinking kegs and partying to now being someone who's truly shifted gears, and that's really the title of your book, Shifting
Yeah.
Gears. So, can you talk a little bit more about that? There we go.
Yes.
Um, how is this new normal that you're experiencing with your life added value not just to you but to the people around you?
Oh, I mean, it's been tremendous. I mean, my wife has been with me throughout the whole gamut. I met my wife when I was 19, so she was in the midst of everything. And we ended up growing a lot from that experience. And for family, I think a lot of families tend to either grow apart or they grow together. And certainly with my family, we grew together through the experience, and it's certainly beyond it over the last 12 years have been amazing. I feel like now, for me, it's like I'm living on borrowed time on God's grace. And so kind of being able to add value in any way that I can to share this message has been amazing. But also experiencing just the value and the community and the connection with other people. I never knew for most of my life that connection is just really the key to human happiness and in our life. And that connection has probably been the most valuable thing that I've experienced, going forward from the connections I've made with friends through business, through, programs like HPS where we met. So meeting people like you and connecting, I think that's just been the most powerful thing on a personal level that's been the most valuable.
And I think that's what God has intended, right? For us
Yeah.
to be connected to each other because we all carry like one piece of the puzzle. So as we get connected, like the puzzle itself somewhat starts to be solved. So
Yeah.
connection is super key. So what is the big desire and hope you hope readers will take away when they read your book?
So when they read my book, I want them to understand that depending on where they're at in their journey, I want them to either understand if they're in a point of feeling hopeless. I want them to understand that there's hope beyond hopelessness. I was sitting in a jail cell completely hopeless, thinking my life was over, actually contemplating taking my life,
Wow.
and I would have given up on the entire miracle that I've had since then, the entire miracle. There's a miracle beyond that hopelessness that anybody may be feeling now. And if I can convey anything to somebody who's in that moment, that would be that. And then for anybody that's on that journey of just like feeling like they have a gap between where they are and where they want to be, I want them to know that there's a pathway, that there is a guideline or a guide path to how they can get from where they're at to where they want to be. And they can bring it to themselves closer or sooner by enjoying the journey and just finding fulfillment in that present moment. And that was really the true nature of it. I set out to want to qualify for the Ironman World Championship, but crossing the finish line of the Ironman World Championship, it was amazing. It was life changing. But it lasted 15 seconds. But the journey to it, the 4 year journey, is the memory that I have now that just reinforces how beautiful it was. Got to enjoy the journey in the present moment. That's what I hope to convey to people.
Wow. That's super interesting. So we've spoken about your book, spoken about your podcast, spoken about your triathlete career, but we haven't really talked about your 9 to 5.
Mhm.
So you're a CEO of a 9 figure business. How do you balance all of that? Because I can just imagine what you get to deal with. They say that heavy is the head that gets to wear the crown.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial life and how it all fits in with everything that's going on.
Yeah. So yeah, the company I run is a fourth generation family business. We've been around for 100 years. My great grandfather started it on the West Coast, and he passed it on to his four kids, and his four kids passed it on to their four, and so on and so forth. So now that we have, pretty large scale family business that that's been running for about 100 years, and there's a lot I often look at the entrepreneurial journey because I'm, doing that on the speaking side and all that kind of stuff, and see that there's definitely overlap to it, but there's just a lot of challenges that I face, saying heavy is that head that wears the crown. If there were things that I didn't know going into kind of when taking on this role, it would be that like, yeah, it does feel very lonely there. It feels like, you don't all of the sudden people who you connected with, kind of just feel like maybe distanced in some ways or more transactional.
Yeah.
So it is challenging to maintain that, but that's where I love finding the connection outside and with other people. But I've learned a lot through this experience and especially with running a family business that many businesses, whether they're family owned business or a startup or anything like that, most of them just require the same amount of things. They require that we add value to the world, and that's like the primary driver, and that we add value and that we find value in the business for those that are working in it, so that there's that value that's coming from all areas, and that we build systems around it to keep improving so that we can stay relevant. So that's really been the focus for the last couple of years, is making sure that we're continuing to add value and build the systems to bring us into the next 100 years.
Wow. That's amazing. So let's talk about legacy because if you think about your great grandfather who started
Mhm.
this, I think the legacy that he left was, the business and, things that came with that. What about Adam Hill?
Yeah.
What legacy do you plan to leave the world with? Like, walk me through that piece a little bit.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because probably a year ago, I would have had a different answer, but I put a lot of thought into this over the last, year or so, well, really over the last few months. And, when when I thought about legacy, I would have think, well, I want to leave this company better than I thought it would be, or I want to build the future for this, and or I want to, build all these things and all of that. But I've really kind of dug into like what are really the core three priorities in my life, and in terms of how I can bring the most value into the world. And when I look at that, it's like, what are the drivers to the legacy that I want to create? Is, yeah, I want to create a world for my kids, or I want to help build my kids up so that they are self-sustainable by the time they leave this house, which is in the next few years. Um, I want to build a spiritual life that is really representative of God's will for me, and really His word and living in this life. And I want to lean into whatever creative energy I have, because I know that's what lifts me up, and that's kind of where I believe my spiritual gifts are. So those three things that I've identified really don't have much to do with business, or or building like an enterprise of some kind or anything like that. But they are very personal to me, because I think everything else comes from those three things. Like, and that's, I think, where the legacy is built. And it may not be saying like there's a true vision out there of like, this is exactly how I want it to unfold, or what it looks like when, I leave this planet. But I think that the best, we can look at our legacies maybe 5 years at a time, where we look 5 years
Mhm.
ahead and we just kind of anticipate where we want to go. And that's kind of what I'm trying to look at. If I'm looking at myself on my deathbed, and I like to do that deathbed exercise. I know it sounds morbid, but there's a deathbed exercise I like to do where I think of myself like when I'm lying on my deathbed, like I've had a long life. I have my family surrounding me, and I want to internalize like what I'm feeling at that moment. Am I proud of what I was? Do I feel good about who I was? And then I can work backwards as to like what I accomplished to achieve that.
Right.
Um, I once saw an interview with Jimmy Carter recently. Jimmy Carter, he had a health scare not too long ago, where I think he had like it was determined he had a terminal brain tumor, or something, that like he thought he was going to die. And somebody interviewed him and asked him the question of like, well, when you look back on what's your proudest moment? And you could see in his face just light up, and you could see him smile. And regardless of what you think about the politics of Jimmy Carter or whatever, it's just that feeling of like that's what you should want to look back on in life at that point in time, is just look back, smile, and be proud of what you became.
Wow. Okay. So, Adam, I follow you online, and I've seen that you are quite the master when it comes to dad jokes. So, do you have a couple of dad jokes you want to just share with us today?
Yeah, I mean, so being that we're recording this close to Christmas time, I like to dress up as Santa and wave to people on the side of the road, but I had to stop doing that because I didn't want to cause an accident. So, and yeah.
You
So
didn't want to
and
cause an accident.
I didn't want to cause an accident. Yeah, it would have been really bad. So
That's cool. Well, Merry Christmas to you, my friend. And thank you so much for the dad jokes. And if you're a dad joke lover, make sure you follow Adam on social. If people want to connect with you, Adam, how do they do that?
yeah, they can go to my website, adamhillspeaker.com, which has all my information there. You can also find me on Instagram at the Adam C Hill, and YouTube. Yeah, at Adam Hill, I'm sorry, at Adam C Hill on YouTube, where you can find my podcast and everything.
And if you guys are looking for a professional speaker who can come rock your stage and really talk about some really powerful stuff, Adam has a very, very powerful keynote, and he can also customize, to really meet your event. But if you're looking for someone who can talk about turning fear into freedom, Adam is your guy. So definitely take a look and see what he has going on. But I've seen him on stage, and I know that he's super talented. But more importantly, he carries a very powerful message that can really help people in the audience realize the ultimate potential that they carry, and more importantly, rise above your fears. Because A lot of us, we have greatness inside of us, but the thing that stops us from achieving our greatness is just listening in to that fear. And fear is false evidence appearing real. And unfortunately, a lot of people believe the false evidence that appears real. So, Adam, thank you so much for teaching me that I can also rise above my fears. And I thank you for the time that you came to hang out with me on Surround Yourself with Greatness. And I'll be rooting for you all the way. And next time you have a race, let me know. I might just come and cheer you on. So thank you so much, Adam.
Thank you, Kuda. This was an honor, man. I appreciate it.